Welcome to the Biblical Excavations Podcast. My name is David Nekrutman. Knowing that your time is precious and you're seeking quality homeschool content, please accept my sincerest gratitude for watching this episode. If you feel this is of value to you and your family, please subscribe to our channel and share the episodes with others. The mission statement is very simple: changing the way on how we teach our children the Bible. More than just a devotional approach to Scripture, reading a few chapters, discussing our feelings to these sacred texts, and prayer, maybe a deeper dive can help our children appreciate His Word. I'm doing this podcast in coordination and partnership with Tamara, a homeschool mother of 20 years. She's from Iowa, I'm from Israel. May this podcast be a blessing to you and your family. David Nekrutman here. Welcome to the Biblical Excavations Podcast with my co-host Tamara. Tamara, I know that you are very hot in Iowa right now, which is sort of unusual when we talk about the state of Iowa. We always think of it as cold, snowy, but you're enjoying the weather out there, correct?
Oh, goodness. I need to correct you on that. Iowa gets 4 complete seasons, and summer is definitely one of them. And so, yes, it gets sweltering here. But then in January, it is frigid. So, yeah, we're in the sweltering part, and it will soon be frigid.
I appreciate you correcting me in my perception of Iowa, because when I'm thinking of Iowa, I always think it's always cold, but I don't think of it as hot. Because I'm in Israel, and it's boiling here. So we're like desert-like conditions, and it's been a heat wave for a while. I thought in this particular episode, we would tackle what we usually enter into the world of homeschool conventions or homeschool conferences about speakers who tend to talk about the Department of Education and public school is bad. And I always thought when walking into a homeschool conference, we've already made the choice that we want to homeschool our kids. Now I'm looking from these conferences on how to properly teach my kids on a variety of subjects. I know our episodes are really dealing about how to teach our children about the Bible and do a deep dive into the Bible. But I think for everything that we're dealing with in the homeschool community, my hope is when I go to a convention or a conference, I'm learning something new about how to properly homeschool our children, as opposed to, saying, of course, it's easy to pick on the Department of Education and public school education in general and say they're bad and we're good. Is that your experience over the years as well?
I have noticed there's a little bit of that does go on at homeschool conferences, and I've wondered because, why, if I'm a homeschooler paying to attend a homeschool conference, why do I need to be convinced to homeschool? And so I wonder sometimes if speakers believe that there's people in the audience or people who are coming that are still on the fence regarding it, and they think that maybe being really negative about the public schools will push people further into the homeschool huddle, so to speak, or if people are looking for ways to convince others about why they're choosing to homeschool. So it's maybe more of a pep rally, and they're pepping people up for homeschool by bashing the other team, so to speak, like a little bit of trash talk, except that's not really something I want to say Christians engage in, but it seems like that would be a mild way of putting what I've heard some of the things that have been said. But yeah, that would be putting it in a positive spin.
So you're finding, again, I want to say that I'm new to the homeschool world because I educated my kids in Israel, and we have a fusion of synagogue and state, meaning I can use my tax shekels to choose which education my children are receiving and have the same value system that I have at home that will be in the school. And it's really one of the major reasons why I moved to Israel close to 20 years ago, because my oldest son was turning 5 in the United States. I was living in New York, and I had to make a decision. Do I want to pay, at that particular point in time, $15,000 to $20,000 a year for Jewish education and send them to private school, or go to a community that would be less expensive in Jewish education in the United States or come to Israel. And obviously, I wanted to be the first of my own family to return home after 2,000 years. But I think we took into consideration, literally, the education that my children would be receiving without putting out so much from my own pockets. $15,000 to $20,000, and this is going back almost 20 years ago. Some private schools can go to $30,000 to $35,000 a year. So it's pretty expensive if you want to have a certain type of valued education. So homeschooling at that particular point in time definitely was not even an option we would think of in the Jewish circles. I know it was very popular within conservative Christian circles, but there was nothing that I saw in resources 20 years ago that you can even do homeschooling within the Jewish world. So you have been a homeschool mom for over 20 years. And I'm like, okay, so how did you adjust to the homeschool world, doing this 20 years ago? And I don't know if it was so popular back then. I think now it's more popular post-COVID. And obviously what's ever been happening with the Department of Education and public school education in general, you even have secular people now coming into the homeschool world as the option because they want to have a good quality education. It doesn't have to be Christian-centered. It's just simply having a good quality education and not learning some of the nonsense that you would learn in the classroom. So, Tamara, can you give me your experience?
Well, our experience, we made the choice to homeschool before we even had children, and not because we're holy, but we did it because my husband is in the ministry, and I grew up in the ministry. And my dad took great pains to take our family on trips and to take a day off every single week. He took Fridays out of the office at church, and he would actually take us out of school, and we would go do things as a family. Because Saturdays we would be out of school, but he would have prayer meetings and church obligations building up towards Sunday. So Friday was our family day. And I remember him doing that. And as my husband and I are entering ministry, my father was the senior pastor, so he could choose and tell the staff, like, everyone's taking off this day. You all have this day off. We were entering larger churches as staff pastors, and we don't have the ability to say, we take this day off. So we went in thinking, once the Lord blesses us with children, which it took us a while, we tried diligently. Once the Lord did bless us with children, we had already made that decision that we're going to homeschool, because then we don't have to subject ourselves to a government, not just the system, but their timetable, when they do school and how they do school, because then we can spend time as a family. Family was priority over education, although I'm very academically minded. So that actually worked very well for us, because we're also a very musical family, and we needed time to incorporate music lessons and practices and recitals and things like that. We just did not want the rhythm of our lives to be rushed and hurried. We wanted to be able to dive deep into things that were important to us and not be rushing all over the place because we had to spend a certain number of days and hours in a school program. So that's why we decided to do that.
So when you're making that decision, obviously you're attending homeschool conventions and conferences on the local level, and then also sometimes on a big national city level as well. So did you find often that you received the necessary techniques or guidance on how to do this for your family?
What helped me the most at that first conference that my husband and I attended together were two tidbits. So actually, I don't remember very much. I'm sure they talked about all sorts of things. But the two tidbits, and other people can take these for what they're worth, but the first tidbit was to make sure that you budget for mistakes, because you're going to end up being convinced that such and such is going to be a lifetime investment and will serve all your children very, very well, and you will love it. And therefore you invest in it. And now you're $100, $125 with this set of books. And then you realize you hate them and your kids hate them. Or they don't do what you needed, or you found you actually could do it better without this, So the speaker said that, and I thought, that was good. And my husband heard it too. He's like, okay, we're going to make mistakes. Okay, we got a budget for mistakes. But thankfully, not too many were made. But then the other tidbit, which doesn't have much to do, I guess, with asking great questions, but on an aside, I think it does. My oldest son is bright and book smart, and I went to a booth, and it was Harvey and Lori Bludorn's booth, if anyone's familiar with teaching the trivia. And I'd heard them speak, and I went to their booth, and I just, as a new homeschool mom, was very nervous because I said, my child is so bright. And I just kind of explained some of the things that were happening and that it had happened. And I said, how am I going to homeschool him? People are saying I need to move forward quickly and do other things. They're making me scared about this and very anxious. And they said, you know what? So let's say your son is a concert pianist by the age he's 10 years old. And he's entering competitions, and he already knows 3 languages and all this stuff. But he's mean to his siblings. He doesn't obey. And he doesn't really know God that well. They're like, you have to think about what really matters. And he's got his whole life to learn all the things. And so his relationship with the Lord, his relationship with his family, those are foundational. And all the other stuff will come from that, if I'm intentional. And obviously I was being intentional. So that really helped me back it up a step. And that got me started on asking good questions, because other people are saying, your kid's bright. They can do this. They can do this. They can, push them, do these things for them, buy this stuff. And they brought it all down. You don't need to buy anything. Here's a book. They gave it to me. Here's this. Read this. Calm down. It's going to be fine. And so, yeah, that wasn't about the government, but that was my first foray into learning that I need to start questioning all the things and teaching my kids to approach life that way, and definitely approach scripture that way too. And so I think by the time I was attending conferences and getting berated with a lot of negativity towards different systems, I was in question mode. And so it still shocks me the way some Christians get so emotional about the government doing what the government does. And so I think there's probably a little more to it individually than it is with homeschoolers in general, except for when you get them together and they haven't learned to question, then there can be this little bit of a herd mentality that we're good, they're bad. And what's bad about that is if someone comes in, like you, who chose private schools, someone comes in, you feel like an outsider. You don't feel welcomed. You don't feel convinced to look at this anymore. You feel insulted and isolated. And if we're wanting to be a welcoming community and actually draw our own families and others closer to the Lord through homeschooling, then yeah, we need to learn the art of the question, but we also have to be kind. And we don't want to insult people right off. Like the first session they attend is all insulting about the way they've chosen to live their lives. And they're the villains. Like, hello, welcome to the homeschool conference. You're a villain. That's not the best way to start the conversation.
Yeah, that's intense. So you see, for me, Genesis chapter 18, verse 19, we finally have like a glimpse into why God elected Abraham. Because he would be an educator. He would be teaching about God's ways to the next generation. Now, that's quite fascinating that we have to literally wait chapters upon chapters to get that point of resume reference that Abraham was elected by God because he would be an educator. Because if you go back to Genesis chapter 12, and God now appears in this amazing revelation to Abraham and tells him to leave everything behind, you really don't have a clue as to why Abraham was chosen. It's only revealed later. So again, this is sort of like a Hebraic nugget, because we want to teach our children a different way of learning the Bible. So I want to end off the podcast this way and say, let's do this following question and challenge our viewers. Why is it that we have to wait to Genesis chapter 18, verse 19 to get a glimpse into why God chose Abraham for the covenant? Why couldn't he say anything beforehand? Like, was he the CEO of Google? Was he a great entrepreneur? Maybe he could take over Starbucks. No pun intended over here. I mean, there could have been a lot of choices that the Bible could have made at an earlier point to tell us why God selected him for covenant. So there is your questioning mode. And this is why I want parents to be encouraged that there is a way to look at the Bible from a macro and micro approach, to dissect it like a surgeon and get the revelational nuggets that you need from the text, because you'll learn something fascinating with the value system. Yes, Tamara, you have a child prodigy.
No.
Right. But at the end of the day, I think the community that you had to encourage you to know what's really important right now is to learn about how to deal with relationships.
Mm-hmm.
That's the essence of it. Most of our walk in life is relationships, whether it be a relationship with God, our family, the community, our workplace. I don't know how many hundreds of books have been published that are in Barnes and Noble, all about how we can communicate. And look at this. The whole reason why God creates the world from the beginning is to have a relationship for humanity. So it's great advice that you got at the beginning of your journey in the homeschool world, that it comes down to, yes, you could be an expert in a particular subject, but it comes down to your value system and how you deal with your fellow human being. By hoping what I'm gaining from your experience, is that solid to say?
It is solid to say. And I think that is excellent advice for anybody with, because my subsequent children weren't as bright. So, and so that same advice worked with all of them. And I think that's also solid advice for when we have children on a special needs spectrum or who have behavioral issues. It's not about, oh no, they're not going to be at this level by this date. That's not the goal. Yes, the academics are incredibly important and we want them to have that solid foundation of academics, but it's God's world and it's full of his creation. So how do we treat his creation? How do we know him and how do we know others? Like you just said, the relationships are so important. And that's why it matters when we go to a homeschool convention, how we talk to the people in our audiences and how we approach people that are coming in from the outside. And we don't want to insult them. We want to challenge them to ask good questions.
And we want to encourage the community because they made a very hard choice. It's not a popular choice. It's easy to send the kid into the public school system, but the parents that I have interviewed over the last few years who have been going to homeschool conferences really want the best for their children. They're seeking ways on how to do this. Sometimes they feel alone and how to juggle, the everyday life of homeschool parents. And so that's the reason why you have so much content out there, I think, online that's very helpful. And our calling right now is to be helpful in the area of Bible education. But it's great to have this conversation with you because I felt I was alone in the way I was taking in homeschool conferences as, wow, I can't believe, I know they're bad, like they're bad and we're good. And I was like, I want something more. And in fact, I went to a homeschool conference. I know I'm being controversial right now. And it was the Bible session that was least attended. And that fascinated me. And I know many of the people who were attending that conference were Christian. And yet, when we were dealing with the Bible session, it was the least attended. So, that's another thing we need to explore. So I just wanted to tackle the subject matter. Was I alone in feeling the way I was feeling in listening to some of the speakers talk trash, as you said, about the other, as opposed to encouraging and giving the proper advice for people who are entering into this world. So, Tamara, thank you very much for the fellowship during this episode. I learned something a little bit about your life as well. And we ask, is there anything else you want to add, Tamara, before we conclude?
One of the things I've learned and this is what I encourage my children to do, this is when I tutor students, what I encourage them to do is when we get, as Christians, we get riled up about certain things, I'm sure as Jewish people, you get riled up about certain things too.
Never.
We have our things we get riled up about, okay? And so just keeping in mind that the people aren't always the enemy. There is evil in the world, but it might not necessarily be the person that you're talking to, or it might not actually be the institution that you find yourself up against. And so I think it's good to learn the art of the question and wonder about things a little bit more, to just step back and not be passive, not be apathetic, but to wonder, why are things the way they are? And how is this affecting me, and why? Like, am I mad? Am I angry? Am I frustrated? Am I, what am I hurt? And then maybe think about, am I feeling persecuted? Because that's, in America, that word gets used a little too often, from my opinion. So, because if it is something about, I'm feeling persecuted in this moment because I'm a Christian homeschooler, or I'm a Christian, and I would say, well, to that point, that might be very valid. So what do we do about that? Well, one, define your terms. So look up the word persecution. What does that actually mean? Now look it up in Scripture, because if the reason you're feeling persecuted is because you're Christian, well, let's see if the Bible has anything to say about that. And there's a lot in the New Testament that talks about persecution. In fact, you can find Jesus specifically talking about that. So you can look that up and you can figure out what God and Jesus and the rest of the church fathers and the apostles said about that, and said how we're to respond to it. So if we wrap our brains around that, that's going to really help us understand where we actually fit in this paradigm and how we're feeling right now.
So to our viewers, thank you for watching. Please, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and share with others. Blessings from Israel and Iowa. Have a great day.